That morning my chest felt heavy, like someone had laid a damp dishrag right over my HRT. I'm 67 years old, spent 37 years as an auto electrician in Detroit, and I've been healthy as a horse since I retired, until lately. Something's been off for a few weeks now. Dr. Henderson, my old neighbor and my doctor for the last 20 years, he's known my son, Eddie, since the boy was in diapers. He pressed that cold stethoscope against my back and chest, listened for a long time, and then he frowned. That frown was the first thing that told me this wasn't just heartburn. Walter, your heartbeat is off. It's not the HRT itself, it's the tension. You've got something eating at you. What's going on? I opened my mouth to say nothing, but the words stuck. What could I tell him that my son and his pretty wife moved back into my old house 8 months ago, supposedly to take CA of me, but I ended up being the handyman and the errand boy that they laugh and talk at the dinner table until I walk in, and then everything goes quiet that the $57,000, our certificate of deposit I'd been saving for 20 years, the one I kept tucked in the bottom of my toolbox in the GA rage, the money I was going to use to buy a little place on the Florida coast, that had vanished sometime last month. Henderson took off his glasses and cleaned them with that little cloth he always uses. He's done that same motion for 40 years. Walter, your blood pressure is through the roof. I'm going to prescribe you something, but you've got to Leah RN to let things go. Your son and daughter-in-law came back to look after you. A lot of guys our age would kill for that. I smiled. Henderson is a good man, but he doesn't get it. He doesn't know what it feels like to live in your own house and feel like a guest. That evening I came home, and he heard low voices from the kitchen. I stood in the hallway corner, out of sight. My daughter-in-law Allison had her back to me, talking to my son Eddie in that tight whisper she uses when she doesn't want to be over here road. He's going to find out sooner or later. You need to come up with something. Eddie saw me then. The color drained right out of his face, and then he snapped on a smile like flipping a switch. Dad, you're back. We were just saying we ought to make you some soup. Allison, turn around. She's a beautiful woman, 42 years old, with those big eyes that crinkle when she smiles. Daddy, she said, all sweetness. But I didn't miss what she had pinched between her fingers. It was the stub from my checkbook, the one I kept in my study drawer. They thought I hadn't noticed the missing money. They didn't know I'd already gone through every corner of the GA rage and the attic the week before. I'd even gotten down on my hands and knees to check if the CA repet edges had been peeled back. I couldn't sleep that night. I got up for a glass of water, around 2 in the morning. Their bedroom door was cracked open, light spilling into the hall, and I heard Eddie's voice. The old man's money can wait. The real thing is the house. Eddie's son's sight. Your dad's got another 10. Maybe 15 years left if he's lucky. You think he's going to sign it over willingly? There was a long pause. Then Eddie said, the doctor said his heart's not great. If something happened to him on his own, like a fall or something. The water glass in my hand wobbled. I felt it splash over my knuckles. I backed away, quiet as a mouse, and sat in the arcade of my room until the first gray light came through the curtains. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I didn't tell anyone. I went to the bank alone. The girl at the counter knew me by name, always called me Mr. Clayton with a smile. Your certificate of deposit, sir, that was cashed out EARLY on the 25th of last month. I said I knew, just confirming that. I walked out of that bank and sat on a bench across the street for a good half hour, November wind cutting through my coat like a knife. I watched the pigeons on the church steeple across the way. 35 years, I raised that boy. I paid his college tuition. I helped him with the down payment on his first house. And him and that wife of his, that woman who calls me daddy with those pretty eyes, they took my savings and they were hoping I'd take a tumble downstairs. I walked into Henderson's office without an appointment. He was talking to his nurse, but he took one look at my face and sent her out and shut the door. Walter, what happened? You look worse than yesterday. I told him about the bank. I didn't tell him the rest, not yet, about the fall. Henderson listened. When I was done, all that pleasant RMTH drained off his face. He sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Walter, there's something I've been holding back because I wasn't sure. He told me Eddie had come to see him last month, said he was worried about my mental state, asked if I'd been forgetting things, getting confused. He told Henderson he thought I might be losing my grip and that maybe I shouldn't be handling my own finances anymore. He said he was doing it for your own good. Henderson's eyes locked on mine. But I've known you 40 years. Your mind is sharper than most men half your age. I felt something was wrong that day, but I didn't have proof. I walked home through the cold afternoon. Allison was in the kitchen frying steaks. Eddie was in the living room watching the game. They both looked up when I came in, and Eddie stood up quick. Dad, where have you been? You left your phone. I looked him right in those blue eyes, the same eyes my dead wife had, and I said, just walked. By the way, I need to see the insurance papers on the house. You know where they are? Eddie's face flickered. He looked at Allison. She smiled, that easy smile. Daddy, I filed all that paperwork in the study drawer. I'll dig them out for you later. That night, I lay in bed, sta ring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but I knew they weren't asleep, because I heard Allison's voice, just a whisper through the wall. Why did he suddenly ask about the insurance today? Then Eddie's low murmur, too soft to make out. I lay there in the dark, and a cold feeling spread through my chest. It never occurred to me, not in all my 67 years, that the person I'd have to watch my back against would be my own flesh and blood. The next morning, I went to McCormick's office. He's my old fishing buddy, retired estate lawyer with 30 years under his belt. I told him the whole thing, from the missing money to the whispers to what I'd overheard about the fall. He was holding a cigar that went dead in his hand. Walter, are you sure? I said I was dead sure. He put the cigar down, pulled up his computer, and when he turned back around, his face was pale. Your son came in 3 months ago. Said you weren't well. Asked me what would happen to the house and your assets if something unexpected happened to you. He wanted to know how to make sure everything transferred straight to him. I sat there in that leather chair holding the armrest so tight my knuckles went white. McCormick said, I didn't give him any specifics, told him he'd need to speak with you directly. But I made a note in the file. Walter, this is serious. This isn't just about money now. He drew up a document right then and there. Froze every non-essential asset under my name. No one could touch anything without me present and a third PA Rudy witness. I folded that paper and put it in my pocket. When I walked out of the office, the sun was out, but I still felt cold all the way through. My wife, Emma, has been gone 6 years now. If she could see what her son had become, that smiling face of hers would just crumble. When Emma died, Eddie cried like a little boy. I thought then that he was a good son that when I got home, Allison had made a full dinner. Steak, roasted potatoes, the works. She'd even opened a bottle of red wine. Eddie poured me a glass. Dad, let's just have a nice meal tonight. You've been working too hard. I looked at that wine and remembered something. Last Wednesday, they'd poured me a whiskey after dinner. I'd slept like I was dead, didn't wake until past 9 the next morning. I hadn't slept past 6 in 50 years. The next day, I couldn't find my CA or keys. They turned up in a laundry basket. I thought I just misplaced them. I looked at that glass of wine in front of me. I pushed it away gently. Doctor's orders. Can't mix with the new pills. Eddie blinked, then laughed too loud. Right, forgot about that. Let me get you some juice. He went to the kitchen. Allison's eyes flicked to me, just for a second, and then she smiled and piled more potatoes on my plate. I ate, and I watched them. Eddie has been a liar since 3rd grade. He punched a kid in the Choulier RD and came home swearing it was the other boy who sta rooted. I believed him then. He's 35 now. He's just gotten better at it. After lunch, I went out to the GA Rage, said I was looking for a tool. I pawed through the trash bag. That whiskey bottle was still there at the bottom. I wrapped my hand in a paper towel and lifted it out. There was a faint white ring of powder around the rim. I wrapped it up CA refill and took it up to my room, tucked in my old suitcase under the lining. That afternoon, I went back to Henderson and showed him the bottle. He put on his reading glasses and studied it a long while. Can't tell by looking, he said, but I know a guy at the lab. I'll have him run a test. Walter, don't say a word to anyone. Just go on like normal. That night, I did something I never told a soul about, not even McCormick. I took the little storage room at the end of the upstairs hall, and I set up a small camera, hidden behind a box of old Christmas decorations, aimed right at the stairwell. There was no way from their bedroom to mine without passing that spot. I just wanted to see what they did when they thought I was gone that Saturday morning. I told them I was going to help the church fix the old organ. I drove around the corner, read the CAR, and walked back through the back alley. Slipped in through the side door and up the stairs to the storage room. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Eddie and Allison came up the stairs. She stopped outside my bedroom door. "You sure he's gone?" Eddie said. I saw his CAR pull out. Then I heard my bedroom door open. Drawers opened. Papers shuffled. Allison said, "You hid that withdrawal slip somewhere good." Eddie said, "He'll never find it." Allison again. "And that lawyer, McCormick, you think he'll keep his mouth shut?" A pause. Then Eddie, "He's a professional, but we might need to speed things up." More shuffling. Then Allison, low and tight. "The old man's getting suspicious. Maybe we should just—" She didn't finish. 10 minutes later, they came back down. I sat in that arcade little room, watching the monitor. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from something harder. I turned off the camera, slipped out the back, got my CAR, and drove home. Eddie was on the couch when I walked in. He looked up STA riled. "Dad, you're back, EARLY. I said, "Fixed it. Simple problem." He said, "Oh," and his eyes flicked up the stairs just once. That night, I lay in bed and thought about Emerida. On her deathbed, she took my hand and said, "Walter, take CA of Eddie. He's got a soft ERT. He can go the wrong way." Now I wonder if she meant a straighter road than I ever imagined. I couldn't tell her what her son had become, so I'd have to handle it myself. The next 2 weeks, I moved through my own house like a spy in a foreign country. I got up at 7, made my coffee, fed the squirrels in the RD, just like always, and sat on the porch reading the newspaper like a man without a CA in the world. But inside I was wound tight as a string. Henderson called me with the lab results. That whiskey bottle had traces of a sedative in it, a common one. Not a lethal dose by itself, but for a man my age, mixed with alcohol, it was enough to knock me out cold for 8, maybe 9 hours. "Your son," Henderson said, his voice flat, "knows you take a HRT medication with a similar or compound. He probably figured a little extra wouldn't be noticed." I put that bottle right back by the trash can where I'd found it, and I made sure Allison saw me toss it out the next morning. At dinner I said, casual as could be, "That whiskey we had last week tasted off. Gave me a headache the whole next day." Eddie's fork paused over his plate for just a beat. "Must have been an old bottle. I'll get you a fresh one." I waved him off. "Don't bother. Doctor says no drinking anyway." The third week, McCormick called me. Eddie had shown up at his office again. This time he brought a document with him. He called it a draft of my dad's will and asked McCormick to look it over. McCormick made a copy before he sent Eddie on his way. I came in and read it right there in his office. It left everything to my only son, EDWA Road, Clayton. House, accounts, everything. And there was a clause at the bottom. "Due to my father's declining health, all financial decisions shall be made by my son on my behalf." The date on it was from the year before, and the signature was my name. Or close enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking too hard. They'd practiced until they got that slant just right. I sat in McCormick's office with that paper in my hands. After a while, I folded it up and put it in my pocket. My knees shook a little when I stood, but not from the cold. I raised that boy for 35 years. I taught him how to throw a baseball. I sat up with him through chickenpox. And he was forging my name on a document that would put me in a nursing home while he sold the roof over my head. Then I remembered something else. In the last 2 years before Emerida passed, Eddie came around a lot. Always had papers for me to sign. Insurance forms, he said. Utility transfers. I signed them without thinking twice. McCormick dug up those old files. Sure enough, 2 of them were powers of attorney, one for property management and one for beneficiae rechanges. They weren't airtight by themselves, but if something happened to me, those papers would give him enough leverage to tie everything up in court for years. That Friday night, I went to bed EARLY like I'd been doing, but I didn't sleep. Around 11, I heard noise downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered through the gap in the railing. The living room was dark, except for the TV flickering. 2 shadows on the couch. Eddie sat 4-way RD. Allison stood in front of him, holding her phone up, so he could see the screen. I couldn't catch every word, but fragments floated up. Expenses this month, a re-too high. The renovation costs. Once he's gone. The words hung in the air like smoke. Once he's gone. I went back to my room, closed the door, and locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed and buried my face in my hands for a long time. Then I stood up, opened the old suitcase, and pulled out a photograph from the lining. Aimee Ritha, standing in the GA den with her watering can, laughing at something I'd said. Her eyes were crescents. I held that picture, and I whispered, "Old woman, your boy's trying to put me in the ground for a house." She just kept smiling in the photograph. I knew what I had to do. The next morning I called McCormick and told him I wanted to rewrite my will. I called Henderson and asked him to recommend an attorney who specialized in elder law. That afternoon, I went to the RDWA restore and bought a new deadbolt lock for my bedroom door. I also bought a small voice recorder, one that fit in my shirt pocket without showing that at dinner I told them the old furnace in the upstairs hallway is making noise. I called repairman for Thursday. "You two gonna be around?" Eddie glanced at Allison. She smiled, smooth as glass. "Of course, Daddy. We'll be here to let him in." I said good. Thursday morning, I told them I was going out for Pa RTS. I pulled the CARA round the corner, Pa Arcade, and walked back through the back EA road. I didn't go in. I went to the shed and watched through a crack in the BOA RDS. They were both in the kitchen. Eddie hadn't gone to work. That wasn't like him. They had papers spread on the table. Allison was reading something aloud, Eddie nodding. I recognized the letterhead from McCormick's firm. I stood there in the cold shed for 10 minutes. Then I saw Allison go upstairs. She came down a few minutes later, holding a small envelope. She handed it to Eddie. He opened it, looked inside, nodded, and slipped it into a jacket pocket. I couldn't see what was in it, but I had a pretty good idea. I walked back to the CAR, drove home, and came in the front door like nothing happened. Allison was at the stove in her apron. "Daddy." The repairman came and went. Said it was a small fix. I said good. "How much?" She waved a hand. "He said he'll bill later." I nodded and went upstairs. Locked my door. Pulled the voice recorder from my pocket. I left it running in my jacket all morning. I hadn't been close enough to get everything, but I'd walked right past them when I came in, and the recorder picked up what they said at the table. I saved the file onto a USB drive. One copy went to Henderson. One to McCormick. That weekend, Eddie turned on the CHARM, made me tea. Sat down to play chess with me, which he hadn't done since he was 15. Offered to drive me to my checkup. I said fine. On the way, though, he took a turn I didn't expect. Instead of Henderson's office, we pulled into a different clinic, one I'd never seen. "Henderson's off today," Eddie said, so I found a specialist. I sat in the passenger seat and said nothing. The doctor was young, didn't look much older than Eddie. He asked me a series of questions, took my blood pressure, and wrote a prescription. Eddie hovered the whole time, butting in with questions. "How's his memory? Does he sleep okay?" The young doctor looked at him, then at me. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Clayton alone for a moment." Eddie blinked, smiled, and stepped out. The doctor closed the door. He looked at me. "Mr. Clayton, that's your son." I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your son came by a few weeks ago. He brought a copy of your medical records. He said you needed a long-term CA reassessment. But I'm sitting here talking to you, and you're as clear-headed as any man I've seen today. Do you understand what those questions he's asking might be used for?" I looked at that young man's face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Trust. A stranger who'd never met me before saw what my own son was doing. I said I understood. He nodded. "I'll give you the Standa RD blood pressure medication. Keep taking what Dr. Henderson prescribed. And I'd recommend you keep a record of every visit you make. Every single one." When I came out, Eddie was waiting. "Everything okay?" I said the doctor gave me a new prescription, and that was all. A flicker crossed his face. Disappointment, maybe. That night, I sat on the porch looking at the STARS. Eddie came out and sat beside me, handed me a cup of tea. "Dad, have you ever thought about what's going to happen to this place down the road?" His voice was light, casual. I said, "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're getting up there in your RS, and this house is a lot of work. Stairs, your RD, all of it. Maybe you should think about putting it in my name. That way I can manage things for you. If you ever needed to go into a home, it'd be easier. I drank my tea and looked at the sky. Then I said, Eddie, your mother told me something before she passed. She said you had the warmest heart of anyone she knew. She said you'd always take care of me. He was quiet. I went on. This house isn't much to look at, but it's on a good lot. 40, maybe 50,000 if I sold it today. You used to run around at your RD when you were little. Your mother planted roses along the fence. Remember, they're all gone now. I can't let it go. Eddie said, and didn't push. But I saw his fingers tighten around his teacup that, when I went up to bed, my legs felt heavier than usual. At the top of the stairs, I turned and looked back. Eddie was standing at the bottom, looking up at me. The expression on his face was hard to read. It wasn't the look of a son watching his father. It was the look of a man sizing up a piece of property. I went into my room, locked the new deadbolt, and lay down in the dark. Tomorrow I would make my move. But tonight, I just lay there with one hand on the photograph of M.A. under my pillow, and I waited for the morning light. I spent the next week laying my groundwork like a man building a stone wall, one block at a time. I didn't rush. I didn't let my hands shake when I poured my morning coffee or when I nodded at Eddie across the breakfast table. I just watched and waited and gathered. Henderson had given me the name of a lawyer who specialized in elder fraud, a Shah RP woman named Patricia O'Neill who'd been putting sons and daughters in their place for 20 years. I called her from a payphone at the gas station, not from my house, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished she said, Mr. Clayton, you've got more than enough to stop them cold. The question is, what do you want to do with it? That was the question. Wasn't it I could have gone to the police right then? I could have had Eddie and Allison hauled in for fraud and attempted theft and a handful of other child ridges that would have followed them for the rest of their lives. But that was my boy, my only boy, the one I'd held in my ARMS in the delivery room, the one I'd taught to ride a bike and drive a stick shift. Somewhere in there, underneath all the scheming and the whispers, I kept looking for the son I used to know. I told Patricia I wanted to give him one chance. Just one. She said that was my call, but she advised me to have all my evidence ready and filed before I did anything. So I filed. I filed everything. I went to the county courthouse and put a freeze on the deed to my house. No transfers, no liens, no changes of any kind without a judge's signature. I went to the bank and put a hold on every account under my name, requiring dual authorization for myself and a designated third party. I took the forged will to Patricia, and she made 3 certified copies, notarized and stamped. I had Henderson write a formal statement about Eddie's visit to his office, the questions he'd asked, the sedative in the whiskey bottle. I had the young doctor from that other clinic write a statement confirming my cognitive function was normal. I even dug up the old utility transfer forms Eddie had made me sign years ago and had Patricia review them for any hidden language that could be used against me. By Thursday, I had a folder as thick as a phone book. I kept it in my old suitcase under the winter blankets. Allison noticed I'd locked my bedroom door a few times and mentioned it at dinner. Daddy, you seem a little distant lately. Is everything all right? I told her I was just tired, that I'd been having trouble sleeping. She made a sympathetic face and offered to get me some herbal tea from the health food store. I said sure. Eddie didn't say much, but I caught him watching me more than usual. He had that look, the same one he used to get when he was a kid and he'd broken something and was trying to figure out if I knew. That Saturday, I decided to test them. I told them I was going to visit an old friend from the auto plant, a man named Jerry who lived 2 hours north. I packed an overnight bag and made a show of kissing Allison on the cheek and shaking Eddie's hand. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. You two hold down the fort. I drove out of town, parked the CA or behind a closed-down diner, and called a taxi to take me back to my own street. I got dropped off 4 blocks away and walked home through the back alley. The sun was going down. I slipped through the side gate and into the RD. The kitchen light was on. I could see them through the window. Eddie was pacing. Allison was at the table with her laptop open. I eased up to the window, staying low, and listened. Eddie was saying, "We have to move faster. He's locking things down. I can feel it." Allison snapped back. "I told you we should have pushed the will through months ago. Now he's got that lawyer friend in his EA, and God knows what else." Eddie stopped pacing. He doesn't know about the policy. Does he? Allison shook her head. I hid the paperwork in my mother's old trunk. He never goes in that room. Policy. A policy. I felt the blood drain from my face right there in the cold year road. They weren't just after the house and the bank accounts. They'd taken out some kind of insurance policy on me. I hadn't found that one yet. I stood there in the RK, one hand pressed against the brick wall to keep myself steady, and I listened to my son talk about me like I was a business transaction. The payout comes through within 30 days of the death certificate, he was saying. 30 days. That's nothing. Allison said, so we wait. But we need to make it look natural. HRT attack. Fall. Something that won't raise flags. Eddie nodded. Henderson's 2 shall RP. That's why we went to the other clinic. Get a paper trail that makes him look confused. Then if something happens, it's just an old man with a bad HRT. I moved away from the window, so slowly my joints ached. I went back through the alley, took the taxi back to my CAR, and drove home the next afternoon like nothing had happened. Eddie was in the RD raking leaves. Dad, how is Jerry? He called out, all smiles. Good, I said. He's getting old, just like me. Eddie laughed. I went inside, and Allison had a pot roast on the stove. The smell used to make me happy. Now it just made my stomach turn up that night. I sat in my room with the suitcase open and the folder in my lap. I read through everything one more time. The forged will, the bank records, the doctor's statements, the voice recordings, the photographs I'd taken of the whiskey bottle and the white powder on the rim, and now a new piece, a policy of some kind. I didn't know where Allison's mother's trunk was, but I knew which room she meant. The sparry bedroom at the end of the hall, the one we used for storage. I waited until 2 in the morning when the house was dead quiet, and I crept down the hall. The trunk was old, covered in dust. I opened it as CA reeful as a bomb disposal expert. Under a pile of old linens and quilts, there was a manila envelope. I pulled it out and took it back to my room. I opened it under the reading lamp. It was a life insurance policy taken out 6 months ago. I was the insured. Allison was the owner. Eddie was the beneficiary. The amount was $200,000 RS. That was what they were waiting for. That was what I was worth dead, that I STA read at that policy for a long time. Then I took a photograph of every page and sent it to Patricia O'Neill's secure email from my phone. Then I put everything back in the trunk the way I'd found it. The next morning I called Patricia and told her about the policy. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Mr. Clayton, that's a documented intent to profit from your death. If we add that to the file, this goes beyond fraud. This is conspiracy. I'm recommending you let me file a police report right now. I told her not yet. I told her I needed to talk to Eddie first. Alone. He's my son, I said. I raised him. I want to look him in the eye and give him a chance to stop this before it gets any worse. Patricia sighed. She said she understood, but she warned me that I was giving a snake one more bite. I said I knew the risk. I take it that I picked my moment on a Tuesday morning. Allison had gone to the grocery store. Eddie was in the living room, watching the news. I walked in and sat down across from him. I had the folder in my hand. I put it on the coffee table between us. He looked at it, then at me. What's that, Dad? I said, it's a folder full of things I've been finding around this house. And some things I've been finding out. His face went still. That smooth, practiced calm slid right over him like a mask. I don't know what you mean. I opened the folder. I pulled out the forged will and slid it across the table. You know what that is? He looked at it. His jaw tightened. That's a draft. I was helping you organize. I pulled out the bank statement. You took my money. I pulled out Henderson's statement. You drugged me. I pulled out the policy. You took out 200 grand on my life. Eddie STA read at the papers. His hands were on his knees, fingers spread wide. He wasn't moving. Then he laughed. A short, RP laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Dad, you've been reading too many detective novels. This is crazy. I said, is it? And I reached into my pocket and pulled out the voice recorder and I pressed play. His voice came through the little speaker, clear as church bells. The payout comes through within 30 days of the death certificate. Allison's voice followed. We need to make it look natural. HRT attack. Fall. Eddie's face drained of every bit of color. I watched it happen. I watched the mass crumble. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. Then he said, "Dad, you don't understand." I held up my hand. "I understand plenty. You want me dead. You want the house and you want the money. You've been planning this for months, maybe longer. And I have every piece of it in this folder." I stood up. My legs were steady. My voice was steady. I told him, "You have until tonight to pack your things and get out. You and Allison. I'm not going to the police yet. I'm giving you this one chance to walk away. But if I see either of you in this house tomorrow morning, I'm calling the district attorney. And I'm giving them everything." Eddie STA read at me. He looked small. He looked like a kid who'd been caught with his hand in the Siwa Kija, only the Siwa Kija was my life. He said, "Dad, please." I shook my head. "You made your choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine." I walked out of the room and up the stairs. I locked my bedroom door. I sat on my bed and looked out the window at the BA trees in the road. My hands were shaking now, but I'd done what I had to do. The ball was in his court. I spent the rest of that Tuesday in my room. I didn't come down for lunch. I didn't come down for dinner. I just sat in the old Aram chair by the window and watched the sun move across the RD, watched the shadows of the BA branches crawl along the fence. I could hear them moving around downstairs. Low voices. The opening and closing of drawers. The front door opened and closed a couple of times. I didn't go to see what they were doing. I'd said my piece. The rest was up to them. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. Eddie's voice came through the wood, muffled and strained. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't answer. He knocked again. "Please, just for a minute." I stayed where I was. I could hear his breathing on the other side of the door. Then Allison's voice, sharper. "Eddie, let it go. He's made up his mind." Footsteps retreated down the hall. The house went quiet. I sat in the RK for another hour, and then I lay down on the bed and waited for sleep. It didn't come easy. The next morning I came down to an empty kitchen. The coffee pot was still warm. There was a note on the table, written in Eddie's hand on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Dad, we're going to stay with Allison's sister for a few days. I think we all need some space. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you will. Your son, Eddie." I read it twice. Then I folded it up and put it in my pocket. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the silence. The house felt different, lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let the stale air out. I called McCormick and told him they'd left. He said, "Walter, that's good, but you know this isn't over. People like that, they don't just disappear." I said I knew. I'd keep my Gua RD up. I called Patricia too and updated her. She said the same thing, but she also said I'd done the right thing by not calling the police. Giving him a chance to walk away was generous, she said. Now you see what he does with that chance. The first few days were strange. I'd gotten so used to having other people in the house that the quiet felt unnatural. I'd catch myself listening for footsteps that weren't there. I'd set the table for 3 and then have to put a plate back. But after a while, I STA root to settle into it. I went through their old room and boxed up what they'd left behind. A few clothes, some books, a hairdryer. I put the boxes in the GA rage and told myself I'd drop them at Allison's sister's house next time I was in that party of town. I STA root going to the diner for breakfast again, something I hadn't done in months. The waitress, a woman named Dottie who'd been serving me eggs for 10 years, asked me where Eddie and Allison had gone. I said they'd found an APA remit. She said, "Oh," and didn't press. Good woman, Dottie. She knew when to leave something alone. I went fishing with McCormick that weekend. We sat on the bank of the river with our lines in the water, and he said, "You doing okay, old man?" I told him I was doing fine. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a call from Patricia. Her voice was tight. "Mr. Clayton, I need you to come into the office. There's something you need to see." I drove over that afternoon. She had a stack of papers on her desk, and her face was grim. "I've been monitoring your accounts, just as a precaution. Something came through this morning. A petition filed in probate court. Your son is trying to have you read mentally incompetent." I sat down. The room felt cold all of a sudden. "On what grounds?" Patricia pushed a document across the desk. "On the grounds that you've been acting erratically, making irrational financial decisions, and refusing medical CA. He's got a letter from that clinic you visited, the one he took you to. The young doctor's statement, but a different version. It says you were disoriented and confused during the exam. And he's got a sworn affidavit from Allison claiming you've been hallucinating and accusing family members of stealing from you. ISTA read at the paper. That's a lie. The doctor told me I was fine. He wrote a statement saying I was fine. Patricia nodded. I know, but Eddie's attorney filed a different version. He claims the doctor was intimidated by you and signed a statement that didn't reflect the true examination. It's a mess, Mr. Clayton. He's trying to create enough doubt that a judge will order a full competency evaluation. If he gets that, he's got a foot in the door. I felt something twist in my chest. Not fear or rage. Cold, clear or rage. I'd given him a chance. I let him walk away. And this was how he repaid me. By coming at me through a courtroom, trying to make me look like a senile old fool. What do I do, Patricia? Lean four-way road we fight. We have all the evidence. The forged will, the bank records, the voice recordings, the whiskey bottle, the insurance policy. We file a counter-petition showing a pattern of fraud and manipulation. We go public if we have to. But we hit back hard, and we hit back fast. I told her to do it, whatever it took. She sta route making calls. I sat in her office for the next 2 hours while she worked the phone. She filed the counter-petition that afternoon. She sent copies of everything to Eddie's lawyer. She called the clinic and made sure they had the young doctor's original statement on file. She even called Henderson and had him write a supplemental statement confirming my cognitive health and detailing Eddie's attempts to manipulate my medical CA that night. I went home and sat on my porch in the cold RK. I thought about Eddie. I thought about what he'd become. I remembered when he was 5 years old, he found a baby bird that had fallen out of nest. He brought it to me in his cupped hands. So CA reeful, so gentle. He said, Dad, can we fix it? I told him we could try. We built a little box and put the bird in it, and Eddie brought it bits of bread and water on a bottle cap. The bird lived for 3 days and then died in the night. Eddie cried for hours. That was my son. That was the boy I remembered. And now that boy was trying to have me declare red crazy so he could take everything I owned. I don't know when he changed. I don't know if it was Allison or if it was the money or if it was something that had been growing in him for years without me noticing. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal, the not knowing when I'd lost him. The next week was a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Patricia got a hearing date. Eddie's lawyer tried to delay, but the judge was old and experienced and didn't like games. The hearing was set for the following Friday. Patricia told me to prepare myself. He's going to bring witnesses. He's going to paint you as a confused old man. You need to be calm. You need to be yourself. That's the best weapon you have. Friday morning, I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to M.A. Radha's funeral. I combed my hair and shaved CA reeful. Patricia met me at the courthouse. She told me Eddie was already inside with his lawyer. He looks nervous, she said. That's good. I walked into the courtroom and I saw him sitting at a table with a slick young lawyer in a shiny suit. Eddie looked pale. He looked thinner than I remembered. He looked at me when I came in, and for a second I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was something closer to shame. Allison was sitting behind him in the gallery. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just sta read at her hands in her lap. I took my seat and waited. The judge came in, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes. She read the petitions. She asked Eddie's lawyer to present his case. The slick young man stood up and talked about my declining mental state and my irrational suspicions and my unfounded accusations against loving family members. He called the young doctor from the clinic as a witness. The doctor took the stand and testified that he'd found me alert and oriented, and that he'd written that in his original notes. Eddie's lawyer tried to trip him up, but the doctor held firm. Mr. Clayton was fully competent when I examined him. The document my signature APA-RS on is a version I never signed. Then it was my turn. Patricia called me to the stand. She walked me through everything. The missing money, the forged will, the sedative in the whiskey, the insurance policy. I told the judge everything, plain and simple, the way I'd lived it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. When I was done, the judge looked at Eddie. She said, Mr. Clayton, your father's testimony is coherent, consistent, and supported by documented evidence. Your petition is denied. I'm recommending the district attorney review this file for possible fraud charges. You and your wife are reordered not to contact Mr. Clayton in any way pending that review. Eddie's face went white. His lawyer stood up and sta root talking about appeals, but the judge cut him off. You can appeal, but you won't win. This court is adjourned. She banged her gavel and walked out. Eddie sat there like someone had punched him in the gut. Allison got up and walked out without looking back. I sat where I was for a long moment. Then I stood up, shook Patricia's hand, and walked out of that courthouse into the cold winter sun. I drove home alone. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a minute. The house looked the same as always. The porch light was off. The RD was ba-re. I got out and went inside. The quiet wrapped around me like a RM blanket. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. My hands were still shaking, but it was over. I'd won. I kept my house and my life and my name. And my son, my only son, he'd lost everything. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept waiting to feel sad. I waited and waited, but the sadness never came. What I felt was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace that the days after the ring passed like water through a sieve. Slow at first, then faster. I woke up the next morning in my own bed in my own house, and for the first time in NEARLYER, I didn't listen for footsteps in the hall. I didn't brace myself for a knock on the door or a question I didn't want to answer. I just lay there in the gray winter light and let myself breathe. Then I got up, made coffee, and sat on the porch with the newspaper. The squirrels came for their peanuts. The neighbor's dog ked at a mailman. Life went on. I got a call from Patricia a few days later. The district attorney had reviewed the file and decided to pursue charges. Fraud, attempted theft, elder abuse. The list was longer than I expected. They're looking at serious time, Mr. Clayton, especially with the insurance policy and the sedation. That elevates it. I asked her what that meant. She said Eddie could be looking at 5 to 10 years. Allison maybe less, but still prison time. I sat with that information for a long time. Is there anything I can do to stop it? Patricia paused. You can decline to cooperate with the prosecution, but given the evidence we've already provided, they can proceed without your testimony. If you want to stop it entirely, you need to talk to the DA yourself. I called the district attorney's office that afternoon. I spoke to a young man named Mr. Reeves, who sounded like he'd just graduated law school. I told him I was Walter Clayton, Eddie's father. I don't want my son to go to prison, I said. I want him to be a RN something, but I don't want to destroy him. Mr. Reeves was silent for a moment. Then he said, Mr. Clayton, with all due respect, your son tried to drug you, forge your name, and collect a life insurance payout. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a serious crime. I told him I understood that. But I also told him that Eddie was still my son, and that somewhere underneath all the greed and the bad choices, there was a boy who'd once ride a baby bird in his cupped hands. Mr. Reeves said he'd take my request under consideration. He couldn't promise anything. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off and sta read at the Christmas decorations I hadn't put up. Thanksgiving was long gone. Christmas was around the corner. I hadn't decorated in RS. Not since a May or the past. Maybe this year I would. Maybe not. A week later, I got a letter. Handwritten on plain white paper. The return address was a post office box. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Eddie. I sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded it. His writing was shaky, like he'd been nervous when he wrote it. Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you. I've done things I never thought I'd do, things I can't take back. I've been sitting here for weeks trying to figure out how I got to that place. How I could look at you and see a problem instead of my father. Allison and I have been staying with her sister, and there's been a lot of time to think. Mostly at night, when I can't sleep, that I don't have an excuse. I don't know if there's one. Money got tight. Allison kept saying we needed more, that we were falling behind. She said your house was just sitting there, that you didn't need all that space, that we'd be doing you a favor by taking it over. And I went along with it because it was easier than saying no. Easier than telling her I couldn't do that to my father. I took the easy road, and I kept taking it until I'd gone so far down I couldn't see the way back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the money. I'm sorry for the lies. I'm sorry for that bottle of whiskey and what was in it. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect you to call. I just wanted to say it out loud, even if it's just on paper. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in my pocket. I went out to the RD and stood by the fence where the roses used to be. The ground was hot RD and cold. I thought about Eddie's letter. I thought about the baby bird. I thought about all the RS between that boy and this man. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost his way. Maybe he'd find it again. Maybe he wouldn't. That wasn't up to me. The next day, I called Patricia and told her I wanted to meet with the district attorney again. She arranged it. I sat in Mr. Reeves's office and told him I'd read Eddie's letter and I believed he was genuinely sorry. I'm not asking you to drop the charges, I said. I'm asking you to give him a chance. Maybe probation. Maybe community service. Something that doesn't put him in a cell with men who've done worse things than he did. Mr. Reeves leaned back in his chair. Mr. Clayton, you're his victim. If you're willing to recommend leniency, that's CA rise weight. But I'm going to be honest with you. Your son is a grown man. He knew what he was doing. And there's no guarantee he won't do it again. I told him I knew that. But I also told him that I'd rather give him the chance to be better and be wrong than lock him up and never know. Mr. Reeves said he'd present my request to the judge. No promises. I thanked him and walked out. Christmas came. I didn't put up a tree, but I hung a wreath on the front door. Dottie from the diner gave me a plate of seal keys. McCormick came by with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on the porch and drank in the cold, watching the neighbors' lights twinkle. You hear from him? McCormick asked. I told him I'd gotten a letter. You write back? I shook my head. Not yet. He nodded and didn't push. New Year's came and went. The winter dragged on. I STA route going to the senior center on Tuesdays, playing CARDS with a bunch of old guys who'd also spent their lives in auto plants and factories. They didn't know about Eddie. I didn't tell them. It wasn't their business. I just played CARDS and drank bad coffee and laughed at their jokes. It felt good. It felt normal. In January, I got a call from Mr. Reeves. The judge had agreed to a deferred prosecution agreement. Eddie would plead guilty to a reduced RGE, 3 RS probation, 600 hours of community service. He'd have to repay the money he'd taken from my account, plus interest, and he'd have to attend counseling. It's a fair deal, Mr. Reeves said. He's lucky you spoke up for him. I said I knew. I thanked him and hung up. That evening I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter back to Eddie. Short and simple. I got your letter. I read it. I know you're sorry. That matters. I don't know if we'll ever be the same, but I don't want to lose you forever. Take the deal. Do the work. Prove me right. Your father, Walter. I mailed it the next morning. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. I'd said what I had to say. Spring came slow, but it came. The snow melted. The grass turned green. I went out to the RD one afternoon with a trowel and a bag of bulbs I bought at the RDWA restore. I dug a row along the fence and planted them. Tulips. Yellow ones. M.A. Radha's favorite. I worked until my back ached and my hands were dirty, and when I stood up to look at my work, the sun was RM on my face. I hear RDCA are pull into the driveway. I turned around. Eddie was standing by the gate. He looked different. Thinner, paler, but his eyes were clear. He had a bag in his hand, and he was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. He didn't come any closer. He just stood there and said, Dad, I came to help with your road. If that's okay. I looked at him for a long time. Then I nodded. There's a shovel in the GA Rage. He walked past me, Towa, RD, the GA Rage, and I went back to my flowers. I didn't turn around to watch him. I just kept digging and planting, bulb by bulb, row by row. After a while, I heard the scrape of a shovel behind me, and I knew he was working on the other side of the road. We didn't talk much that day. We didn't need to. We just worked the way fathers and sons used to, in the same space under the same sun. When the sun STA route to go down, I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees. Eddie was leaning on his shovel, looking at the fence line. He said, "Mom always liked this spot." I said I remembered. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. I know I've said it before. I'll keep saying it if I have to." I shook my head. "You don't have to keep saying it. You just have to keep showing up." He nodded. He didn't cry. Neither did I. We just stood there in the twilight, two old men in a RD full of freshly turned EARTH. Then he put the shovel back in the GA rage and walked to his CAR. He paused at the gate and looked back. "I'll come next Saturday, if you want." I told him I'd be here. He got his CAR and drove away. I went inside and washed my hands. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table. Through the window, I could see the line of bulbs along the fence. They bloom in a few weeks. Yellow ones. Aimé Ridha's favorite. I ate my sandwich and watched the RK come down that night. I went to bed EARLY. I lay there in the quiet, and I thought about the months behind me. All the anger and the fear and the cold nights. All the phone calls and the meetings and the papers. And then I thought about the RD and the bulbs and my son standing at the gate with a shovel in his hand. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if he'd come back or if he'd sap AR again. But I knew one thing for sure. I was still here. The house was still here. And I could still plant flowers if I wanted to. I closed my eyes and slept through the night for the first time in year. No dreams. No shadows. Just the deep, quiet sleep of a man who'd fought his battle and come out the other side. That in the morning I made coffee and sat on the porch. The sun was coming up over the rooftops. A squirrel ran along the fence, stopped to look at me, and scurried off. I drank my coffee and watched the day begin. I thought about writing another letter to Eddie. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way, the door was open. And that was enough that the end well. Folks, that's the story. Walter made it through, and so can any of us. It's not always about winning big. Sometimes it's just about holding on to what's yours and giving people a chance to find their way back. If this story hit home for you, hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more where this came from. Stories about real life, real people, real struggles. I'll be here every week with a fresh one. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you next time.